Hey everyone, it's Ankit Patel. Welcome to a brand new video. Today I want to talk about inflation and some jobs that I see disappearing in the near future. And if you're excited about today's video, drop a like. It really does help out with everything I'm doing and support everything I'm doing. Leave a comment with what jobs you think are going to be gone and why in the future. And what jobs you think are going to replace those, or what jobs you see coming in the future that we don't currently have right now. Subscribe if you're new for weekly videos on investing and about life. Let's try to hit 7,000 subscribers. With all that out of the way, let's get into today's video about inflation and jobs.
Everyone is talking about inflation.
Inflation.
It's the word that's been on everyone's lips lately.
What is inflation, and should we be worried about it? Inflation is a measure of how much of a price of goods and services have increased by over time. Typically, we measure inflation by comparing it to the cost of things today versus how much it would have cost 12 months ago. Why is it important to measure inflation? Inflation is an important statistics because as price rises, the amount of goods and services one can buy falls. This leads to a slowdown in economic growth, which can impact other important areas such as employment levels, living standards. How do governments control inflation? In order to keep inflation in check, most countries have a central bank that controls money supply. Central banks use two main monetary policies tools that control inflation. The first one being setting interest rates. Changes in banks' rates feed through to how much interest households get on savings and how much interest people pay on a loan. This affects the amount of spending in the economy, so helps inflation to either fall or rise. And number two is buying bonds. Central banks buy government bonds or corporate bonds from other financial companies or pension funds. When they do this, the price of the bonds tend to increase, which means that the bond yield or interest rates that the bondholders receive tend to decrease. So right now, you know how big the bond market is. It's bigger than the stock market. And right now we have the Fed printing out so much money. They're buying up junk bonds, propping up the stock market. And a good way of determining inflation is using like stores like Walmart, Costco, Target, and see how much what products are people buying, how much they paid compared to it to 12 months ago, and that'll give you a good idea of what's going up and what sector or department or items are going up on price, and lets you know about supply and demand, what certain products have demand, what products don't have demand, how quick are they running out of supplies. Like for example, when you have hurricane season coming around, people are looking for generators, water, all these other products like wood to prepare for the hurricane season. So the demand's going to be crazy for that area where the hurricane might be going or is going to go. So people want to prepare. So that's just an example and things you should be considering when you're looking at investing.
And some are looking back at history.
In fact, we've not heard inflation talked this much since really the 1970s.
That's because over the past few months, prices for everything from gasoline to groceries have been rising sharply as the economy roars back from the pandemic recession. This graph charts the Consumer Price Index, a metric that measures the average change in prices for consumer goods and services compared to a year ago, or more simply put, inflation. In May of this year, prices spiked 5% to reach the highest annual inflation rate in nearly 13 years.
Even Costco is warning us about the high inflation right now, as we prepare for the holiday season and as people go shopping and get their Christmas gifts ready for their kids or their loved ones. So we have to keep inflation in mind, because right now if you go to Costco, certain products might be higher than other products, and that's how you know which products are going to be going up in price. And it's a good way to track the growing problems. Right now we have weak employment, and rising prices are rising at a crazy amount. And right now the Fed is worried, and they should be, because they don't want to overdo it, and they're scared that inflation might go way higher than they expected. So Jerome Powell is worried right now. The Fed has two jobs: fostering maximum employment and keeping inflation low and steady. Which right now, if that's their two jobs, they are failing. But what can we do as to hedge against inflation? We can invest. We can buy more assets. And those two things will help you hedge against inflation. I mean, like FTX right now is paying 8%. All you have to do is put money, but it's only up to 10,000. You're gonna get that 8%. Anything above it is that you're gonna get 5% for that, which is not bad, considering what inflation might be. Like 6 or 5%. So it'll help you hedge against it. But today, inflation has jumped higher, and the rising wages suggest that employers may need to continue to lift prices to cover their costs. At the same time, millions of jobs are still missing compared to before, and they are only trickling back. So in a few minutes, I'm just going to go over what jobs I think will vanish in a couple years from now, and so it's something to keep in mind of. And because if you work in one of those industries, it's a good idea to understand that might happen, it might not, we don't know. I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but I just wanted to bring it up to people's attention. Jerome Powell and the Fed chair and his colleagues have been pumping $120 billion into the markets each month, holding interest rates to near zero to keep borrowing costs cheap and credit flowing easily, helping to stock demand and encourage employers to expand and hire. Which right now, I think a lot of people, we're making more on unemployment than going to work. So they took the unemployment, they quit their jobs, they were sitting at home collecting unemployment. The Fed, printing money, propping up the market, and now a whole bunch of employers have all these job openings. Right now we have high job openings everywhere, but nobody wants to work, and some people are scared that they might get COVID. Fed policymakers have repeatedly promised that even as they pull back on bond buying, they will continue supporting the economy with low rates. They're more traditional and more powerful tool for as long as it helps. If rapid inflation looks posed to stick around and the labor market is taking a long time to heal, though, they might find themselves forced to lift rates sooner in the jobs rebound than they would like. Inflation came in at 4.3% in August, as far as or far above the central bank's goal, which is to average 2% over time. So it's doubled, more than doubled. And I think it's higher than 4.3 right now, way higher than that. Here's a graph of leisures and hospitality wages are still well outpacing overall wages. So if you've been looking at the job reports, you know, they've been counting Uber drivers as 2 jobs and a couple other like jobs that are considered 2 jobs, so the unemployment numbers are not even accurate. So
for those old enough to remember it, the Great Inflation was a period in which the cost of living for millions of Americans soared. From 1965 to 1982, prices for food and everyday consumer items rose dramatically from 2% in 1962 to 15% in 1979. During that same period, unemployment also rose steadily, eventually reaching just above 10%. The term stagflation, an economic condition of both rising inflation and increasing unemployment, became the go-to phrase to describe the period's economic malaise. This was a time when consumers protested rising meat prices, union members picketed for cost of living pay increases, and long lines for unemployment and gas became commonplace.
Here in New Jersey, 10% of the workforce is unemployed. Across the nation, the average is 8%.
The main lesson from the 70s is that kind of nagging, persistent, recurrent double-digit inflation doesn't happen overnight. It sets in over many years, and it set in because of a long series of policy mistakes in Washington.
The Great Inflation has its roots in the government spending of the 1960s. Consumer prices began rising under President Johnson as he escalated the Vietnam War and launched his Great Society social programs. But the double-digit inflation the period is famous for didn't begin until President Richard Nixon took office.
The time has come for a new economic policy for the United States.
In 1971, Nixon ordered that the dollar would no longer be backed by gold.
surging inflation and volatile bond prices are challenging investors. There are remedies for the problem in the bond market. Experts say none of them are perfect. On one hand, global inflation, driven in a large part by higher food, energy prices, has spiked to levels unseen in generations. Anyone who has recently strolled through the aisles of a grocery store or filled up their cars with gas can see that. On the other hand, the Federal Reserve has indicated that it might try to put a damper on inflation by tapering its bond prices and rising the interest rates under its control. Those moves could reduce the value of existing bonds. Nevertheless, some bond investors say it's already time for the Fed to act. And I agree, it is time for them to act and do something, because right now what they're doing is not working. They expected inflation to be 2%, but it's at 4.3%. But it's probably even higher than that. That was just back in August. We're in October now. The U.S. Consumer Index, which includes volatile food and energy prices, rose 5.3% over 12 months, which ended in August. Even with preemptive Fed action, spiking inflation could itself drive the yields on new bonds higher, because investors expect at least some real return above the inflation rate. Dealing with the twin threats of inflation and vulnerable bond prices is challenging right now, as you can see. I'm curious on what you think the Fed should do. And do you think they should act? Let me know in the comments below. So here's some items that you might notice that are more expensive if you went out trying looking for these items. And so first we have used cars and trucks, fuel, oil, meats, fish, eggs, cars and trucks, rentals, airline fares, dishes and flat wire, women's apparel. So here's a graph of meat prices compared to other food categories. And as you can see, the price of meat has gone up, like, let's say, so it was around maybe 12 or 11. Now it's at 15.7, about 3% increase. Here are the jobs that will disappear in the next 10 years, or maybe even less, probably around 2030. First off, we have drivers. As you know, we have robo taxis and Elon Musk working on his Tesla cars being able to pick up people when you're at work, let's say, for example, and you want to have your car make money for you. He'll probably have the car be a taxi for other people, and then have them pick up those people, and then you get paid a certain amount every year for you letting them use your car. So that's why drivers are going to probably be gone. And then we have the automated driving in Tesla, so it's not fully automatic yet, but you know, it's getting there. Then we have bankers next. We have apps like SoFi, Webull, and when SoFi gets that bank charter, people are just going to use the app. Why would you want to go to a bank? Right now, like, majority of banks won't even let people in. And if you do want to come in, you have to make an appointment. So we might have to be dealing with banks being gone. So accountants and bookkeepers is another thing that might be possibly gone. We have all these different softwares and applications that all you have to do is put in the numbers and automatically generates everything for you. So that might be gone. Telemarketers. It's hard to believe that Americans still has nearly 9,000 telemarketer companies. But those companies employ more than 500,000 of our neighbors and people that around the U.S. The Guardian predicts that there's a 99% chance telemarketing will be automated in the decade ahead, with chances of making cold calling sales being so low. The vast majority of people now going to find what they need, and it only makes sense that these jobs will disappear forever. Next we have cashiers. We have people that can just buy stuff online nowadays, avoid waiting in line, driving to locations, and you know, that saves so much time when you can just do it online. When go to Amazon and just buy what you need, and then have it shipped to you. We have even food, like we have HelloFresh. You can have food delivered to your house, and then you can make it at your house. Well, I absolutely hate self-checkouts at grocery stores, but let's face it, major chains from Kruger to McDonald's would love to replace all their counter staff with let's say the card readers or something. Heck, Amazon and Whole Foods are even doing away with Koskis themselves. The future where whether we want it or not, self-serve. Add in the fact that online shopping continues to dominate in store sales, and we're looking at 97% chance that untold millions lose their livelihoods. On the brighter side of things, these aren't the only jobs that will disappear. In the decade ahead, we will lose millions of more. So we have a list of travel agents, paralegal, legal assistants, fast food cooks, songwriters, translators, librarians, booksellers, coal and oil workers, teachers, parking meter attendants, air traffic controllers, newspaper reporters, movie theater workers, lumberjacks. But new jobs will be created, right? Sure, maybe. But in the vampire economy, those jobs will most likely be gauged less secure for less pay and with less say, you know? Well, at least my job is safe. Maybe.
Inflation robs every American, every one of you.
Nixon also influenced the Fed's monetary policy, pushing the central bank to pump more money into the economy and keep interest rates low.
By letting inflation rise gradually for a number of years, the Fed compromised the trust the public held that the Fed would maintain price stability. Businesses and households started expecting that inflation would persist.
As prices went up, workers started pressing in part for unions. And as wages went up, companies started raising prices even more. And we got this game of leapfrog where prices and wages both went up.
We must whip inflation right now.
These policy missteps continued under President Ford. And later under President Carter, the issue was exacerbated further by OPEC's oil embargoes.
A more serious domestic problem. That problem is inflation.
It wouldn't be until President Jimmy Carter appointed Paul Volcker as the chairman of the Federal Reserve that the great inflation finally began to disappear.
Paul Volcker, the Fed chairman, said, I'm going to stop this cycle. And he clamped down on the growth of money supply. And he jacked up interest rates. It caused two very severe recessions. But that, it turned out to be really what needed to happen to get inflation under control.
Today, we can see some clear similarities between our modern inflationary period and that of the 1970s. Just like the 70s, prices are rising. The Federal Reserve has increased the money supply, and government spending is up. But comparing today's inflation with that of the entire Great Inflation, especially the 1970s, is not accurate.
I graduated